Imagine driving down a busy road when you spot something that freezes your heart. A stray dog standing defiantly in the middle of the chaos, shielding her tiny puppies from speeding cars. What would you do? For one delivery driver, this was no ordinary morning. What she decided to do next would spark a chain of events no one could have predicted. Could a single act of courage change the fate of a family in desperate need? Stick around to uncover the story that will leave you speechless. The early morning sun had barely risen over the city when Amelia, a young delivery driver on her regular route, slowed her van to a crawl. The road ahead was chaotic, cars honking, drivers swerving, and in the center of it all, a stray dog stood firm, shielding her litter of puppies. Amelia's heart pounded as she watched the scene unfold. The dog, skinny and trembling, barked furiously at the approaching cars, her body acting as a barrier between the relentless traffic and her helpless pups. Amelia had seen stray dogs before, but something about this scene gripped her. It wasn't just the dog's defiance or the vulnerability of her puppies, it was the look in her eyes. Despite the chaos and danger, the dog's gaze carried a mix of desperation and fierce determination, silently pleading for help, yet unwilling to abandon her pups. The traffic roared around them, drivers shouting in frustration, but the dog didn't move. Her ribs jutted out from under her muddy fur, a clear sign of her struggle to survive. Her puppies, barely old enough to walk, huddled close to her legs, their tiny bodies trembling with every passing vehicle. Amelia knew she had to act. Pulling her van to the side of the road, she turned on her hazard lights and grabbed a blanket from the back seat. Her heart raced as she stepped out into the chaos. "It's okay, girl," she whispered, trying to mask her fear with calm. "I'm here to help." The dog growled low, her protective instincts kicking in, but Amelia didn't back away. She crouched slowly, holding out the blanket like a peace offering. "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." The dog hesitated, her body tense, but something in Amelia's voice seemed to break through her fear. With a small whimper, she stepped aside, allowing Amelia to gently scoop up the trembling puppies. The moment was surreal. Amelia, now cradling the fragile lives of the pups, felt the weight of their trust. The mother dog followed close behind, her eyes never leaving Amelia, as if silently entrusting her with her family's fate. What happened next would not only change the lives of this brave dog and her puppies, but also transform Amelia's life forever. Amelia carefully placed the two trembling puppies in the blanket she had laid out in the back seat of her van. Their tiny bodies wriggled weakly, their eyes half closed as they tried to adjust to their new surroundings. The mother dog, though hesitant, climbed in after them, her eyes darting nervously between Amelia and the chaotic road she had just left behind. The van's engine rumbled softly as Amelia closed the door and climbed into the driver's seat. Her hands shaking slightly, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the mother dog curling her body protectively around her pups. Despite the thin coat of dirt and exhaustion that clung to her, there was an undeniable strength in her posture, a quiet, unwavering determination to protect her little ones. As Amelia pulled back onto the road, she couldn't help but wonder where they had come from. The sight of them standing amidst the relentless traffic had been haunting. It was as though they had appeared out of nowhere, a desperate plea for help in the middle of her otherwise routine day. She glanced again in the mirror, catching the mother dog's wary eyes watching her every move. "It's okay," Amelia said softly, as much to herself as to the dog. "We're going to figure this out." The cityscape gave way to quieter suburban streets, the chaos of the morning traffic fading behind her. Amelia's mind raced with questions. How long had the dog been out there? What had happened to her? The ribs pressing sharply against her fur told a story of hunger and hardship, and the pups' frail frames suggested they had been born into a world of struggle. Amelia's thoughts were interrupted by a soft whimper from the back seat. She glanced over her shoulder to see one of the puppies, a tiny bundle of brown and white fur, trying to crawl closer to its mother. The mother nudged it gently with her nose, guiding it back to safety under the blanket. Amelia's chest tightened at the sight. She didn't know much about dogs, especially not stray ones, but she knew she couldn't leave them on their own. Pulling into the parking lot of a small convenience store, she grabbed her phone and quickly searched for the nearest animal shelter. The screen displayed a handful of options, but the closest one was still over an hour away. Amelia sighed, running a hand through her hair. She had deliveries to finish, a schedule to keep, and a boss who wouldn't take kindly to delays. But how could she think about packages when these 3 lives were hanging in the balance? Returning to the van, Amelia opened the door and knelt by the back seat. The mother dog flinched slightly, but didn't growl this time. Her eyes met Amelia's with a mix of weariness and trust that made Amelia's heart ache. "Hang in there, girl," Amelia whispered. "We're going to get you some help." She made a quick stop to grab a bag of dog food, a couple of disposable bowls, and a bottle of water. Back in the van, she poured some food into one bowl and water into another, placing them carefully on the floor of the back seat. The mother dog sniffed the air cautiously before leaning forward to eat, her movements slow and deliberate. The puppies, sensing the change in energy, began to stir more, letting out tiny squeaks that sounded almost like cries. The mother paused her eating to nuzzle them, her maternal instincts kicking in despite her obvious exhaustion. Amelia sat in the driver's seat, watching the scene unfold. She felt a strange mix of emotions: admiration for the dog's resilience, anger at whoever had abandoned them, and a deep, unshakable responsibility for their well-being. "Looks like you've been through a lot," Amelia said softly, her voice catching in her throat. "But you're safe now." The rest of the drive was quiet, the van filled with the occasional sound of the pups shifting under the blanket and the mother dog's soft sighs. Amelia's mind buzzed with plans. She would take them to the shelter, make sure they were cared for, and then... What? Walk away? The thought made her stomach turn. As she pulled into the gravel driveway of the shelter, a sense of unease settled over her. She had done the right thing bringing them here, hadn't she? But as she parked the van and turned to look at the mother dog, who now lay resting her head on her paws, Amelia felt a pang of doubt. The bond she had seen growing between the mother and her pups, the trust beginning to form in the dog's eyes, could she really walk away from that? Steeling herself, Amelia opened the door and gently coaxed the dog and her puppies into her arms. The mother resisted at first, but eventually relented, her body sagging with the weight of exhaustion. As Amelia carried them toward the shelter's door, she whispered, "I don't know what's next for you guys, but I promise, I'll make sure it's better than where you've been." The receptionist looked up in surprise as Amelia entered, her arms full of the fragile family. "Looks like you've had an eventful morning," the woman said kindly, motioning for Amelia to bring them into the exam room. Amelia nodded, her heart heavy. You could say that. Inside the shelter's exam room, the vet, Dr. Ellis, quickly sprang into action. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, which seemed to ease the mother dog's nerves. Amelia stood back, watching anxiously as the vet examined the dog and her puppies. "Poor thing, Doctor," Ellis murmured, running her hands gently along the mother dog's thin frame. "She's severely malnourished, but she's been doing everything she can to keep these little ones alive. Her instincts are remarkable." Amelia's heart twisted. "Will they be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Ellis nodded, though her expression remained serious. "With proper care, they should recover. The mother will need a lot of rest and nourishment, and the pups are still very vulnerable. It's going to take time." The vet continued her examination, checking the puppy's vitals and noting their frailty. The smallest pup let out a tiny squeak, its little legs trembling as it tried to crawl closer to its mother. Amelia couldn't help but step closer, her protective instincts mirroring the mother dog's. Dr. Ellis looked up, her eyes meeting Amelia's. "You said you found them on the road." Amelia nodded. "Right in the middle of traffic. She was shielding them. It was incredible, but also heartbreaking." Dr. Ellis sighed, shaking her head. "It's likely they were abandoned. This isn't uncommon, unfortunately. But for her to survive this long with 2 pups, that's nothing short of a miracle." The word abandoned hit Amelia like a punch to the gut. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her blood boil. Who could leave a dog, let alone one with newborn pups, to fend for herself? "What happens now?" Amelia asked, her voice tinged with both concern and determination. "Well, Doctor," Ellis began, "they'll need a temporary foster home at least until the mother is strong enough and the pups are weaned. After that, we can look for adopters." Amelia hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. A foster home. The words hung in the air, and she felt an almost magnetic pull toward the idea. But was she ready for such a responsibility? She barely had time to think before the mother dog turned her head, locking eyes with Amelia. It wasn't just a look, it was a plea, a silent request that seemed to say, "Don't leave us." Amelia swallowed hard. What if I fostered them? The words spilled out before she had time to second-guess herself. Dr. Ellis smiled softly. "That would be wonderful, if you're sure. But it's a big commitment, especially with newborns. They'll need round-the-clock care." "I'll figure it out," Amelia said firmly, surprising even herself. "I can't just walk away from them." With the paperwork sorted and a bag of supplies loaded into her van, Amelia prepared to take her new charges home. The shelter staff helped her settle the mother and puppies comfortably, providing blankets, a formula, and clear instructions for their care. The drive back felt surreal. Amelia glanced in the rearview mirror, catching the sight of the mother dog watching her again with those same deep, trusting eyes. The pups, now nestled against their mother's side, seemed more relaxed, their tiny bodies no longer trembling as much. When Amelia pulled up to her apartment, the reality of her decision began to sink in. Her place wasn't exactly set up for fostering animals, let alone a dog and her 2 puppies. But as she carried them inside, carefully arranging their makeshift bed in a quiet corner of the living room, she felt a strange sense of purpose. "You're safe now," she murmured, sitting beside them on the floor. The mother dog, whom she decided to call Ruby, gave a soft sigh and rested her head on her paws. The puppies wriggled closer, their tiny tails wagging faintly. Over the next few days, Amelia's life revolved around Ruby and her pups. Every few hours, she fed the puppies with formula, monitored their progress, and made sure Ruby was eating enough to regain her strength. The work was exhausting but rewarding. Ruby slowly began to relax, her wariness replaced with a quiet trust as she allowed Amelia to tend to her and her little ones. One evening, as Amelia sat on the floor beside their bed, one of the pups, a feisty little ball of fur she had named Lucky, managed to crawl onto her lap. Ruby watched from her resting spot, her tail thumping softly against the floor. It was the first time Amelia had seen her wag her tail, and it filled her chest with warmth. "You've got quite the little fighter here," Amelia said, scratching behind Ruby's ears. The dog leaned into her touch, her eyes closing briefly in what looked like relief. But despite the progress they were making, Amelia couldn't shake the thought of what Ruby had endured. Where had she come from? Had someone abandoned her intentionally, or was there more to her story? The questions lingered unanswered as Amelia promised herself one thing: Ruby and her pups would never have to face such hardship again. It had been a week since Ruby and her pups moved in with Amelia, and their bond had only grown stronger. Ruby's once gaunt frame was slowly filling out, her coat gaining a soft sheen. The pups were growing too, their tiny tails wagging more often, and their eyes beginning to sparkle with curiosity. One rainy afternoon, Amelia returned home from her delivery route, balancing groceries and supplies for the dogs. She stepped inside and was immediately greeted by the excited yips of the puppies. Ruby stood nearby, her tail wagging faintly as she watched Amelia set the bags down. "Miss me?" Amelia asked with a grin, crouching to greet them. But as she reached for the bags, her gaze fell on something unusual near the front door, a crumpled piece of paper wedged halfway under the mat. Frowning, Amelia picked it up and unfolded it. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the scrawled note. "That dog doesn't belong to you. I want her back. I'll be watching." Amelia's chest tightened as she scanned the room, her mind racing. Was someone watching her? How did they even know Ruby was here? A chill ran down her spine as she glanced at Ruby, who was now sitting alert, her ears perked. Taking a deep breath, Amelia locked the door and drew the curtains, trying to calm the rising unease. She couldn't shake the image of Ruby standing in the middle of the busy road, shielding her pups. Was this related? Had someone been looking for her all along? That evening, she called the shelter and spoke to Dr. Ellis, recounting the note. "Do you think it could be from her previous owner?" Amelia asked, her voice tight with worry. "It's possible," Dr. Ellis replied, her tone cautious. "But if they cared about her, why abandon her in such terrible conditions? Whoever wrote that note doesn't sound trustworthy." "Should I call the police?" Amelia asked. Dr. Ellis paused. "It wouldn't hurt to report it, just in case. And be extra cautious for now. Keep Ruby and the pups indoors." Amelia nodded, her resolve hardening. "I won't let anything happen to them." Later that night, As the rain pattered against the windows, Amelia sat on the couch with Ruby by her side. The pups slept soundly in their bed nearby, their tiny snores a soothing background melody. Amelia stroked Ruby's fur, her thoughts churning. "Whoever hurt you before won't get another chance," she whispered. Ruby tilted her head, her amber eyes meeting Amelia's with an intensity that made her feel as though the dog understood every word. The next morning, Amelia decided to investigate. She revisited the spot where she had first found Ruby and the puppies, hoping for clues. The road was quieter now, but the memories of that chaotic morning came rushing back. She parked her van and walked along the roadside, scanning the area. A few yards from the spot where Ruby had stood, she noticed something half buried in the grass. Kneeling down, she brushed away the damp leaves and revealed a worn leather collar. It was tattered, the buckle rusted, but the tag was still intact. Amelia's hands trembled as she held it up to the light. The tag bore a name, Ruby, and a phone number. Her stomach knotted as she dialed the number, unsure of what to expect. After a few rings, a gruff voice answered. "Who's this?" I found a collar with this number," Amelia said carefully. "It belongs to a dog named Ruby." There was a long pause before the man spoke again, his tone sharp. "You found her? Where?" Amelia hesitated, her instincts warning her not to reveal too much. "She was on the side of the road. I've been taking care of her and her pups." "Pups?" the man echoed, his voice tinged with surprise. "She had pups?" "Yes," Amelia said, her voice firm. "But she was starving and in terrible condition when I found her." "If she's yours, why wasn't she cared for?" "That's none of your business," the man snapped. "Just tell me where you are so I can get her back." Amelia's grip tightened on the phone. "Not until I know what happened to her. She's safe now, and I won't let her go back to a dangerous situation." The man's voice grew cold. "You've got no right to keep her. She's mine." Amelia ended the call, her hands shaking as she clutched the phone. Whoever this man was, he didn't deserve Ruby. She knew she had made the right choice, but the encounter left her more determined than ever to protect Ruby and her pups. When she returned home, Ruby greeted her at the door, her tail wagging faintly. Amelia knelt down, holding the collar in her hands. "This was yours," she said softly, showing it to Ruby. The dog sniffed it briefly, then turned away as if rejecting the past it represented. "You don't need that anymore," Amelia said, tossing the collar aside. "You're not going back." As the day wore on, Amelia fortified her home, securing the windows, adding extra locks to the doors, and keeping Ruby and the pups close. She didn't know what the man might do, but she wasn't about to take any chances. The tension in Amelia's apartment was palpable in the days following the phone call. She couldn't shake the unease of knowing someone out there claimed ownership of Ruby, a claim she wasn't willing to honor. Every time she glanced at the front door or caught a shadow passing by her window, her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Ruby, too, seemed more alert than usual. She stayed close to the puppies, her ears constantly twitching at the slightest sound. Amelia noticed how her protective instincts kicked in any time someone approached the apartment door, even if it was just the mail carrier. To ease her nerves, Amelia decided to reach out to the police. She explained the situation to Officer Ramirez, a kind but practical officer who listened attentively to her story. "It's good you called," Ramirez said, jotting down notes. "If the man contacts you again or shows up at your home, let us know immediately. For now, it's best to document everything, and if you can, avoid interacting with him directly." Amelia nodded, grateful for the advice but still feeling the weight of the situation. "I just want to make sure Ruby and the puppies are safe," she said, her voice firm. "They're lucky to have you," Ramirez replied. "Not everyone would step up the way you have." That evening, Amelia decided it was time to introduce Ruby to the rest of the world, or at least to the quiet park a few blocks away. The puppies had grown stronger, their little legs now sturdy enough to support them for short, clumsy walks. Amelia figured the fresh air might do them all some good. She packed a small bag with water, treats, and a blanket, then gently coaxed Ruby and the pups into the van. Ruby hesitated at first, her body tense as she sniffed the interior of the vehicle, but eventually she settled in the back seat, keeping a watchful eye on her pups. The park was quiet when they arrived, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grassy field. Amelia spread out the blanket under a tree and let the puppies explore the immediate area. Ruby stayed close, her gaze darting around as she assessed their new surroundings. For the first time in weeks, Amelia felt a small sense of relief. Watching the puppies stumble over each other and seeing Ruby relax, even slightly, reminded her why she had taken them in. This was what they deserved, a chance to feel safe, to play, to be happy. A few other park-goers stopped to admire the little family, their smiles widening as the puppies wagged their tiny tails. One woman approached cautiously, holding out a hand to Ruby. "She's beautiful," the woman said. "What's her name?" "Ruby," Amelia replied, smiling as Ruby sniffed the stranger's hand before retreating to the blanket. "And the puppies?" the woman asked. Amelia chuckled. "That's Lucky and Patch. They're quite the handful." As the conversation continued, Amelia felt a flicker of hope. Not everyone in the world was like the man who had abandoned Ruby. There were people who cared, who saw the value in these lives. But her moment of peace was short-lived. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Amelia noticed a figure lingering near the edge of the park. Her heart skipped a beat. It was the same man from the phone call. He hadn't noticed her yet, but she couldn't take any chances. Amelia quickly gathered the puppies, wrapping them in the blankets, and called for Ruby. The dog obeyed immediately, her body tense as she followed Amelia back to the van. As they drove away, Amelia's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing. The man's presence wasn't a coincidence. He had found them. Back at the apartment, Amelia double-checked the locks and drew the curtains tightly. Ruby paced the living room, her instincts on high alert. The puppies, sensing the tension, huddled close to their mother. Amelia sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. She needed a plan. The man wasn't going to stop and she couldn't keep living in fear. But what could she do? Moving wasn't an option, and she didn't want to risk taking Ruby and the puppies to another shelter where they might not be as protected. Suddenly, an idea struck her. Dr. Ellis had mentioned a local rescue group that specialized in protecting animals from abusive situations. Perhaps they could help. Without wasting another second, Amelia grabbed her phone and dialed the number. "Hello, this is Safe Haven Rescue," a warm voice answered. Amelia explained her situation, detailing everything from the night she found Ruby on the road to the note and the man's appearance at the park. "You did the right thing calling us," the woman on the other end said. "We've dealt with cases like this before. We can provide legal assistance to ensure Ruby and her puppies stay safe, and we can help you with resources to protect yourself." Relief washed over Amelia as they discussed the next steps. For the first time since finding Ruby, she felt like she wasn't alone in this fight. The following morning, Amelia met with a representative from Safe Haven Rescue, a no-nonsense woman named Clara, who exuded calm and confidence. Clara listened intently as Amelia recounted every detail of her experience with Ruby and the mysterious man. "We've seen cases like this before," Clara said, flipping through a folder of documents she had brought. "If this man has been involved in animal neglect or abuse, there's a chance he's been reported before. We'll start by checking his background." Amelia nodded, relief mingling with apprehension. "And if he tries to take Ruby?" Clara's expression hardened. "He has no legal claim to her. As long as you document everything and stay vigilant, we'll ensure Ruby and the pups remain with you." Clara also suggested installing a security camera outside Amelia's apartment, offering one from Safe Haven's stockpile of donated equipment. By the end of the day, the camera was mounted and operational, its lens pointing directly at the front door. Despite the new measures, Amelia couldn't shake the tension that hung over her home. Ruby, too, seemed to sense the lingering threat. She stayed close to Amelia at all times, her eyes constantly scanning the room as if expecting danger to burst through the door. Meanwhile, the puppies continued to grow, oblivious to the stress around them. Their playful antics were a constant reminder of why Amelia was fighting so hard. Lucky had developed a habit of tugging on Ruby's tail, much to his mother's patience, while Patch loved to hide under the couch and pop out to surprise his brother. One evening, as Amelia played with the puppies on the living room floor, she noticed Ruby pacing near the window. The dog's ears were perked, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air. "What is it, girl?" Amelia asked, moving to peek through the curtain. Outside, the street was quiet, the orange glow of the streetlights casting long shadows, but Ruby's posture didn't relax. She let out a low growl, her gaze fixed on a dark corner near the building's entrance. Amelia's heart raced. She grabbed her phone and pulled up the feed from the security camera. The screen showed nothing unusual, just the empty stoop and the parked cars lining the street. But Ruby's instincts told a different story. Deciding not to take any chances, Amelia called Officer Ramirez. "I think someone's outside my building," she said, her voice trembling. "Ruby's acting like she senses something." "I'll send a patrol car to check it out," Ramirez assured her. The minutes stretched into an eternity as Amelia waited, Ruby still stationed near the window, her growls rumbling softly. When the patrol car finally arrived, Amelia exhaled in relief. The officer searched the area thoroughly, but found no signs of anyone lingering nearby. "It could have been an animal or just a shadow," the officer suggested, though his tone wasn't entirely convincing. "But it's good to stay cautious." After the officer left, Amelia sat on the couch, stroking Ruby's fur. "You're keeping me on edge, girl," she said with a nervous chuckle. Ruby leaned into her touch, her eyes still wary. The next day brought another unexpected challenge. Clara called with an update. "We've done some digging on the man you spoke to," she said. "He's got a record, a history of neglect and illegal breeding. But here's the catch. He's claiming Ruby as his property and might try to press charges." Amelia's stomach sank. "What does that mean? Can he actually take her?" Clara's tone was firm. "Not if we fight it. We've dealt with cases like this before. We'll file for Ruby to be legally transferred into your care. But it might require going to court." The thought of legal battles was daunting, but Amelia was resolute. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect them." As the rescue team prepared their case, Amelia began noticing small, unsettling signs around her building. Scratches on the stairwell railing, a footprint in the muddy patch by the side entrance. Once, she found a torn piece of fabric snagged on the fence, a scrap that looked eerily similar to the man's tattered jacket. Determined not to let fear consume her, Amelia focused on giving Ruby and the puppies the life they deserved. She took them to the park regularly, watching with pride as the pups grew more adventurous. Ruby's trust in Amelia deepened with every passing day, her protective instincts gradually giving way to a newfound sense of security. Still, the threat lingered in the back of Amelia's mind. One evening, as she reviewed the security footage, she froze. A shadowy figure appeared briefly on the camera, standing near her door before disappearing out of frame. Amelia's pulse quickened. She forwarded the clip to Clara and Officer Ramirez, who assured her they would investigate further. "You're not alone in this," Clara reminded her. "We'll keep Ruby safe." As the night stretched on, Amelia sat by the window, Ruby resting her head on her lap. Together, they stared into the darkness, waiting for whatever would come next. Amelia woke the next morning with a sense of unease that clung to her like a heavy blanket. Ruby's watchful eyes followed her every movement as she prepared breakfast, and the pups playfully darted underfoot, blissfully unaware of the tension in the air. Amelia couldn't shake the image of the shadowy figure from the security footage. Who was this person? And what would they do next? Later that day, Clara arrived for a visit, her arms full of supplies, extra blankets, food for the puppies, and a folder brimming with documents. "We're filing the paperwork to transfer ownership of Ruby and the pups to you officially," Clara explained as she set the folder on the table. "But the process could take weeks, and we need to be prepared for any retaliation from this man." Amelia nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm ready. Whatever it takes, I'll fight for them." Ruby, lying by the door, lifted her head at Clara's voice. Clara knelt down, extending her hand palm up in a gesture of trust. Ruby hesitated, but eventually sniffed Clara's hand, her tail giving a cautious wag. "You've done an incredible job with her," Clara said, smiling. "It's rare for a dog with her history to trust again so quickly." Amelia's chest swelled with pride, but the compliment was bittersweet. "She's the one teaching me," she admitted. "Her resilience, it's humbling." Clara's expression softened. "It's mutual, Amelia. She feels your dedication, and that's why she's healing." That evening, Amelia decided to take the pups for a short walk around the block. She bundled them in their tiny harnesses, Ruby trotting beside her like a vigilant guardian. The neighborhood was quiet, the golden glow of streetlights casting long shadows. But as they rounded a corner, Ruby froze, her ears pricking forward. Amelia followed Ruby's gaze to see a man leaning against a lamppost. his face partially obscured by a hood. Her stomach turned to ice as she recognized the outline of his tattered jacket. The man smirked, his eyes locking onto Amelia's. "Out for a stroll," he called, his voice casual but dripping with menace. Amelia's grip tightened on Ruby's leash, her heart pounding. "Leave us alone," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The man shrugged, stepping away from the lamppost, just admiring the view. "That dog's looking good, almost like she remembers me." Ruby growled low in her throat, stepping protectively in front of the pups. Amelia didn't wait for him to make another move. "Come on, Ruby," she said firmly, turning and walking briskly back toward her apartment. She didn't look back, but the sensation of being watched crawled along her skin. When they reached the safety of her building, Amelia locked the door and leaned against it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Ruby pressed against her leg, her warm presence grounding Amelia's spiraling thoughts. She immediately called Clara and Officer Ramirez, recounting the encounter. "He's escalating," Ramirez said. "I'll increase patrols in your area and we'll file a formal report. If he approaches you again, call 911 immediately." After hanging up, Amelia knelt beside Ruby, stroking her fur. "You're so brave," she whispered. "I promise I'll keep you safe." The following days were a whirlwind of preparation and vigilance. Clara helped Amelia fortify her home with additional locks and reinforced windows. Ramirez checked in regularly, his presence a reassuring reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. Despite the precautions, the encounter with the man weighed heavily on Amelia. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if he tried to break in? What if he hurt Ruby or the puppies? The thought of losing them was unbearable. Amelia's parents, whom she hadn't seen in months, called after hearing about the situation. Her mother's voice trembled with worry. "Amelia, are you sure you're safe? Maybe you should come stay with us for a while." "I can't leave Ruby and the pups," Amelia said firmly. "This is their home now. I can't abandon them." Her father spoke up, his tone gentle but firm. "You've always had a big heart, kiddo, but make sure you're not putting yourself in danger." Amelia reassured them as best she could, but their concern echoed her own fears. That night, as Ruby and the pups dozed by the fire, Amelia stared at the documents Clara had left, her mind wrestling with doubts. Could she handle this alone? Was she in over her head? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft whimper. Ruby had stirred, her nose nudging Amelia's hand. "Hey, girl," Amelia said softly, scratching behind Ruby's ears. The dog's eyes met hers, calm and steady, as if to say, "We've got this." In that moment, Amelia felt her resolve solidify. She might be scared, but she wasn't alone. Ruby's trust and loyalty gave her the strength to push through the fear. The next morning, Amelia met with Clara to finalize the legal paperwork. As they signed the documents, Clara placed a hand on Amelia's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing. Ruby and the pups are lucky to have you." Amelia smiled, her heart swelling with determination. "No, Clara, I'm the lucky one." A week passed without incident, but Amelia remained on edge. Every knock on the door, every unexpected noise outside set her heart racing. Ruby, too, seemed to sense the unease. Her once relaxed demeanor had shifted back to alertness, her ears constantly swiveling toward faint sounds. One evening, as Amelia prepared dinner, she noticed Ruby standing by the window, her body rigid. Snow and Pebble were asleep in their crate, blissfully unaware of the growing tension. Amelia cautiously approached the window and peered outside. There, across the street, was the same man leaning against a parked car. He wasn't trying to hide this time. His posture was casual, but the way his eyes bore into Amelia's apartment sent chills down her spine. "Ruby," Amelia whispered, her voice trembling. Ruby growled softly, her gaze locked on the man. Amelia grabbed her phone and quickly dialed Officer Ramirez. "He's back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's just standing there, watching us." "I'm on my way," Ramirez said. "Stay inside. Keep the doors locked." The minutes dragged on as Amelia watched the man from the window. Ruby stayed by her side, her growl low and continuous. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. When Ramirez arrived, he checked the area but found no sign of the man. "He's testing you," Ramirez said grimly. "He wants you to feel vulnerable, but don't let him intimidate you. We're building a case against him. Just keep documenting everything. Amelia nodded, her resolve hardening. I won't let him win, she said, glancing at Ruby. We won't let him win. The following day, Clara called with surprising news. I've been digging into his background, she said. Turns out, he has a history of animal abuse. He's been reported multiple times for neglecting and mistreating dogs. There's no record of him trying to reclaim any of them before now. It's strange that he's so fixated on Ruby. Amelia's stomach turned. So, what does he want? Why won't he leave us alone? Clara hesitated. It's hard to say. Maybe it's about control. Maybe he sees Ruby as something he lost and wants to reclaim, no matter the cost. The conversation left Amelia feeling both furious and uneasy. That night, she installed an additional security camera outside her apartment. As she reviewed the footage from the past week, her heart sank. The man had been outside more often than she realized, lurking in the shadows and watching her home. The next morning, Amelia decided to confront her fears head-on. She reached out to a lawyer who specialized in animal welfare cases. I want to make sure he has no legal claim to Ruby or the pups, she explained during their consultation. The lawyer assured her they could strengthen her case by gathering evidence of Ruby's condition when she was found. We'll need statements from the vet, the shelter, and anyone else who can attest to her mistreatment. Amelia contacted Clara and Dr. Patel, who both agreed to provide the necessary documentation. We'll make sure the court sees what kind of person he is, Clara said firmly. Feeling bolstered by their support, Amelia returned home to Ruby and the pups. Snow and Pebble greeted her with playful yips, and Ruby wagged her tail softly, her eyes brighter than Amelia had seen in days. We're going to get through this, Amelia promised, scratching behind Ruby's ears. Together. 2 nights later, the tension reached a breaking point. Amelia was sitting on the couch, Ruby curled up beside her, when the sound of breaking glass shattered the calm. She jumped to her feet, her heart racing as she realized the front window had been smashed. Ruby was on her feet instantly, barking furiously as Amelia ran to check on the pups. They were safe in their crate, but their frightened whimpers broke her heart. Amelia grabbed her phone and called 911. Someone just smashed my window, she told the dispatcher, her voice shaking. I think it's the man who's been stalking us. Stay on the line, the dispatcher said. Officers are on their way. As Amelia waited, she armed herself with the pepper spray Ramirez had given her. Ruby stood by the door, growling low, her body tense and ready. When the police arrived, they found a rock wrapped in a piece of paper lying on the floor beneath the broken window. The message scrawled on it sent chills down Amelia's spine. She belongs to me. Officer Ramirez examined the scene, his expression dark. He's escalating, he said. We need to act fast before this gets worse. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. She sat by the window with Ruby at her side, her thoughts racing. The man's actions were becoming bolder, more dangerous, but Amelia refused to be intimidated. Ruby and her pups had found safety in her home, and she wouldn't let anyone take that away. As dawn broke, Amelia made a decision. She called Clara and Officer Ramirez. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to end this, she said. I'm not running and I'm not giving up. Ruby nuzzled her hand, her amber eyes filled with quiet determination. Together, they would face whatever came next. Amelia spent the following day reaching out to every resource she could think of. Clara connected her with a local animal rights advocate, Jenna, who had a history of handling cases involving abused or neglected animals. Jenna arrived at Amelia's apartment that afternoon, her demeanor calm yet purposeful. This isn't just about Ruby and her pups, Jenna said after Amelia recounted everything. This man's actions suggest a pattern of control and cruelty. If we expose him, it could prevent future harm, not just to Ruby, but to other animals too. Amelia nodded, her determination solidifying. I'll do whatever it takes. Ruby deserves to feel safe, and so do Snow and Pebble. Jenna suggested filing for a restraining order, which would make it illegal for the man to come near Amelia, her home, or the dogs. It won't solve everything, but it's a start, Jenna explained. Clara arrived soon after, arms full of case files and printed evidence. I've compiled everything we have, she said, setting the stack on Amelia's table. Pictures, vet reports, witness statements. This will make it hard for any judge to side with him. Ruby, who had been lying near Amelia's feet, perked up as Clara entered the room. She padded over cautiously, sniffing Clara's outstretched hand before leaning into a gentle scratch behind her ears. Clara smiled. She's such a fighter. Jenna and Clara worked late into the evening, organizing the evidence into a cohesive timeline. Meanwhile, Amelia tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Ruby and the pups. Snow and Pebble, oblivious to the tension in the air, tumbled across the living room floor, their tiny tails wagging furiously. "You know," Clara said, watching the puppies play, "their resilience reminds me of Ruby's. It's like they know they're safe now." Amelia smiled softly. "They've given me so much joy, even in the middle of all this. I don't know what I'd do without them." That night, Amelia sent an email to the shelter that had rescued Ruby, asking if they had additional records of her condition upon intake. She also contacted her lawyer, who confirmed that the restraining order had been filed and a hearing was scheduled for the following week. Despite these steps, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on Amelia. As she sat by the fire, Ruby curled up beside her. She found herself wondering how she'd managed to get this far. She glanced down at Ruby, whose steady gaze seemed to say, "You're not alone." 2 days later, Amelia received a call from Officer Ramirez. "We've identified the man," he said. "His name is Kevin Harlow, and he has a history of animal neglect charges, though none have resulted in convictions." "What happens now?" Amelia asked. "We're building a case against him," Ramirez replied. "The restraining order is a good step, but we need more evidence to keep him away permanently. If you can testify about how Ruby and her pups were when you found them, it would strengthen our case." Amelia hesitated for only a moment. "I'll do it, whatever it takes." As the hearing date approached, Amelia's support network rallied around her. Clara visited daily, helping with preparations and offering words of encouragement. Jenna organized a small group of animal rights advocates to attend the hearing, showing solidarity for Amelia and Ruby. Even Amelia's parents, who had initially been wary of her decision to take in the dogs, called to offer their support. "We're proud of you, sweetheart," her mother said. "What you're doing, it's brave." On the eve of the hearing, Amelia found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since the day Ruby appeared in the middle of that busy road. What had started as a split-second decision to intervene had grown into something much bigger, a fight for justice, not only for Ruby, but for every animal that had been mistreated and discarded. Ruby seemed to sense Amelia's introspection. She nudged her hand gently, her eyes soft but steady. Amelia smiled and leaned down to stroke Ruby's fur. "We've come so far, haven't we, girl? And we're not stopping now." The hearing day arrived, and the courtroom was packed with supporters. Clara, Jenna, and Officer Ramirez sat in the front row, their presence a tangible source of strength for Amelia. As she took the stand, she recounted the day she found Ruby and the pups, describing their condition and the events that followed. When it was Ruby's turn to be discussed, Amelia's voice trembled with emotion. "She's not just a dog," she said. "She's a survivor. She fought for her pups and found the strength to trust again, even after everything she's been through. I won't let anyone take that away from her." The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. When the hearing concluded, Amelia stepped outside, where a crowd of supporters had gathered, holding signs advocating for animal welfare. She felt a surge of hope, knowing she wasn't alone in this fight. Amelia anxiously waited for the judge's decision, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. Ruby sat at her feet, her presence a quiet reassurance. Snow and Pebble were safe at home with Clara, but their absence made the moment feel heavier. Every second seemed to stretch into an eternity as the judge flipped through the evidence. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Based on the testimonies and evidence provided, I find that the conditions in which Ruby and her puppies were found constitute clear neglect. Furthermore, the defendant's history of similar allegations reinforces the potential for continued harm. The restraining order will be upheld, and any attempt to approach Mrs. Morgan or the dogs will result in legal consequences." A wave of relief washed over Amelia, her breath catching in her throat. She glanced at Ruby, whose amber eyes seemed to mirror the emotion. Jenna and Clara, sitting in the gallery, broke into quiet applause, their faces lighting up with pride. Amelia anxiously waited for the judge's decision, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. Ruby sat at her feet, her presence a quiet reassurance. Snow and Pebble were safe at home with Clara, but their absence made the moment feel heavier. Every second seemed to stretch into an eternity as the judge flipped through the evidence. Finally, he cleared his throat. Based on the testimonies and evidence provided, I find that the conditions in which Ruby and her puppies were found constitute clear neglect. Furthermore, the defendant's history of similar allegations reinforces the potential for continued harm. The restraining order will be upheld, and any attempt to approach Mrs. Morgan or the dogs will result in legal consequences. A wave of relief washed over Amelia, her breath catching in her throat. She glanced at Ruby, whose amber eyes seemed to mirror the emotion. Jenna and Clara, sitting in the gallery, broke into quiet applause, their faces lighting up with pride. But even with the restraining order in place, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that Kevin Harlow wasn't done. That night, as she lay in bed, Ruby curled protectively at her feet. A sense of unease crept in. She double-checked the locks on her doors and windows, her heart heavy with the knowledge that people like Kevin rarely gave up so easily. The following days were uneventful, almost deceptively so. Ruby began to thrive, her coat growing shinier and her energy returning. Snow and Pebble had discovered the joy of chasing a tennis ball, their clumsy antics filling the apartment with laughter. For the first time in weeks, life felt normal, but normalcy shattered one cold evening when Amelia returned from work. The front door was ajar, the lock broken. Her heart plummeted as she pushed it open cautiously, calling for Ruby. Silence greeted her. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. The living room was untouched, but the back door hung wide open, its frame splintered. Panic gripped her chest. "Ruby! Snow! Pebble!" she called, her voice trembling. A faint whimper answered her from the bedroom. Amelia rushed in to find Ruby standing in front of the bed, her body tense and her teeth bared. Snow and Pebble cowered behind her, their tiny bodies trembling. Amelia dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around them. "You're okay," she whispered, her relief quickly replaced by anger. Whoever had done this had crossed a line. She called Officer Ramirez, her voice shaking as she recounted what had happened. Within minutes, he and a team of officers arrived, securing the scene and collecting evidence. "This wasn't random," Ramirez said grimly, inspecting the damage. "Whoever did this wanted Ruby." Amelia's hands balled into fists. "Kevin, it has to be him," Ramirez nodded. "We'll investigate, but you need to stay somewhere safe for now. He's clearly not giving up." That night, Amelia and the dogs stayed at Clara's house. Ruby remained on high alert, pacing the living room, while Snow and Pebble clung to Amelia. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had fought so hard to protect Ruby and her pups, and now it felt like Kevin was determined to take that away. As she sat on Clara's couch, Amelia's phone buzzed. It was a message from Jenna. "I've reached out to the local animal rights community. We're organizing a rally outside the courthouse tomorrow. We won't let him get away with this." Amelia's resolve hardened. Kevin had underestimated her, but he would soon learn that she wasn't alone in this fight. The next morning, the rally drew dozens of supporters. They held signs reading "Justice for Ruby" and "Protect the Voiceless." Jenna had contacted the media, and reporters were interviewing Amelia, Clara, and others about the case. Kevin showed up, standing on the courthouse steps with a smug look. But as he scanned the crowd, his expression faltered. The sight of so many people rallying for Ruby's safety seemed to rattle him. Amelia stepped forward, holding Ruby's leash. "You wanted her because she's strong, but her strength doesn't belong to you, it belongs to her, and we'll fight to make sure she's never hurt again." The crowd erupted in applause, and Kevin, now visibly uncomfortable, retreated into the building. As the rally wound down, Ramirez approached Amelia with an update. "We've got enough evidence to press charges," he said. "Breaking into your home violated the restraining order. He won't be walking away this time." Amelia felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the realization of how close she had come to losing Ruby and her pups. She crouched down, stroking Ruby's fur. "We're safe now," she murmured. "I promised I'd protect you, and I will." The courtroom was tense, a stark contrast to the rally's energy the day before. Kevin sat across from Amelia, his smug demeanor replaced by agitation. The weight of the restraining order violation, coupled with the rally's publicity, had shifted the narrative against him. Officer Ramirez took the stand first, detailing the evidence collected from the break-in at Amelia's home. "The fingerprints on the back door matched Kevin Harlow's," he said firmly. "We also recovered the rope he used, which he left behind in his rush to escape." Kevin's lawyer tried to object, but Ramirez's testimony was airtight. The courtroom murmured as the implications sank in. This wasn't a man reclaiming a lost dog, it was a calculated act of intimidation. Amelia's turn came next. As she approached the stand, she took a deep breath, her eyes briefly meeting Ruby's steady gaze from the gallery. Clara sat beside Ruby, Snow and Pebble nestled in her lap, their presence a comforting reminder of why Amelia was fighting. "I found Ruby and her puppies on the road," Amelia began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "She was shielding them from traffic, putting her life at risk to keep them safe. That's who Ruby is, a protector." She recounted the break-in, the fear she felt finding her home violated, and the lengths she had gone to ensure Ruby and her pups were safe. "Ruby isn't just a dog to me," she continued, her voice firm. "She's family, and no one has the right to treat her like she's disposable." The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. Kevin's lawyer tried to discredit Amelia, suggesting she had overreacted, but her testimony was too compelling, her emotions too raw. Outside the courthouse, the rally had continued, supporters holding up signs and chanting for justice. News outlets captured the scene, amplifying the story far beyond the local community. Ruby's journey had become a symbol of resilience and the fight against animal cruelty. Inside, the tension reached its peak as the judge prepared to deliver his decision. The room fell silent as he cleared his throat. "This case isn't just about property or ownership," he began. "It's about responsibility and respect for life. The evidence shows that Mr. Harlow not only failed in his responsibility, but actively endangered these animals. The restraining order will be made permanent, and criminal charges for the break-in and violation of the order will proceed." The gallery erupted in quiet applause, and tears welled in Amelia's eyes. She looked down at Ruby, who wagged her tail, seemingly sensing the victory. That evening, back at Clara's home, the atmosphere was celebratory. Jenna arrived with a cake, and Clara brought out a bottle of wine. Even Snow and Pebble seemed to sense the joy, their playful barks filling the room. Amelia, however, couldn't fully relax. "Do you think he'll try again?" she asked Jenna as they sat by the fire. Jenna shook her head. "With the charges against him and the media attention, it would be too risky. He's lost the public's sympathy, and that matters more than he'd admit," Clara chimed in. "You've built a community around Ruby's story. Even if he tries, he'll face resistance at every turn." Ruby, lying at Amelia's feet, let out a contented sigh. Amelia reached down to stroke her fur. "We've been through so much," she whispered. "But we're safe now." As the days turned into weeks, Amelia noticed a transformation in Ruby. The once cautious dog now wagged her tail freely, her playful side emerging as she chased Snow and Pebble around the yard. The bond between them had deepened, a testament to the trust they had built together. Amelia, too, felt changed. What had started as an impulsive act of compassion had evolved into a fight for justice, teaching her the strength of community and the power of resilience. One evening, Clara showed Amelia an article about Ruby's case. "Look," she said, handing her the tablet. The headline read, "From the Streets to Safety, How One Dog's Journey Inspired Change." The article detailed Ruby's rescue, the rally and the courtroom victory, highlighting Amelia's role in advocating for her. "It's not just about Ruby anymore," Clara said. "Her story is changing the way people see stray animals. You've done something incredible." Amelia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "It wasn't just me. Ruby did the hard part. She survived." That night, as Amelia watched Snow and Pebble tumble across the floor, she realized that her life had taken a path she hadn't expected, but wouldn't trade for anything. Ruby's journey wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation. Hers, Amelia's, and everyone touched by their story. The weeks following the courtroom victory were a mix of relief and cautious optimism. Ruby and her pups continued to thrive under Amelia's care, and their story gained traction in the local and even national news. Donations poured in to support animal shelters, and Amelia began receiving messages from people inspired by Ruby's resilience. But while the public celebrated, Amelia couldn't shake the lingering unease. Kevin Harlow's influence might have waned, but she knew the fight wasn't over. His sudden disappearance after the trial, coupled with his known history of intimidation, left her with a sense of unfinished business. One chilly evening, Amelia decided to take Ruby and the pups for a walk in the park. It was their first real outing as a family, and the pups, now growing stronger, bounced ahead, exploring every leaf and twig. Ruby, ever the vigilant protector, kept a close eye on them while staying near Amelia's side. The park was quiet, the usual evening crowd thinned by the cold. As they strolled along the path, Amelia's phone buzzed. It was Clara, checking in as always. "How's our little pack doing?" Clara asked cheerfully. "They're great," Amelia replied, watching Snow and Pebble chase each other in circles. "We're at the park. It's peaceful." She stopped mid-sentence, her words catching in her throat. Across the park, a figure stood near the edge of the trees. It was a man, his hood pulled low, watching them intently. Amelia's heart skipped a beat as her instincts flared. "Amelia? Are you there?" Clara's voice crackled through the phone. "Yeah," Amelia said quickly, forcing calm into her voice. "I'll call you back." She clipped the leash to Ruby's collar, her hand trembling slightly. "Come on, girl," she murmured, gesturing for the pups to follow. "Time to go." As they headed toward the parking lot, Amelia glanced back. The man was moving now, trailing them at a distance. Ruby, sensing the shift in Amelia's demeanor, let out a low growl, her ears flattening against her head. Amelia's mind raced. Should she confront him? Call the police? Her grip tightened on Ruby's leash, drawing strength from the dog's unwavering presence. By the time they reached the car, the man had closed the gap. Amelia quickly ushered Snow and Pebble into the back seat, Ruby hopping in after them. As she slammed the door shut, the man stopped a few feet away, his face partially illuminated by the parking lot lights. "Amelia!" he called, his voice unmistakable. It was Kevin. Amelia's pulse thundered in her ears. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice firm despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. Kevin raised his hands, feigning innocence. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, though his tone carried the same menace she remembered from court. "I just want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Amelia shot back. "You've already lost." Kevin smirked, taking a step closer. "Lost? You think this is over? That dog belongs to me. She always has." Ruby barked sharply, her body pressed against the car window. Snow and Pebble whimpered in the back seat, their tiny forms huddling together. "You abandoned her," Amelia said, her voice rising. "You gave up any claim to her the moment you left her and her puppies to die. She's mine now, my family." Kevin's expression darkened, his smirk fading. "You've made a big mistake, Amelia," he said quietly. "You think you can just take what's mine." Before Amelia could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Step away from her, Kevin." Amelia turned to see Officer Ramirez emerging from the shadows, his hand resting on his holster. "We've been keeping an eye on you," Ramirez said, his tone steely. "Violating a restraining order, stalking. You're digging yourself a deeper hole." Kevin hesitated, his bravado faltering as Ramirez stepped closer. "This isn't over," he muttered, backing away into the darkness. Amelia let out a shaky breath as Ramirez approached. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning the area. "I think so," Amelia replied, her voice unsteady. "Thank you for showing up. We've been monitoring him since the trial," Ramirez explained. "He's been lying low, but we figured he might try something. You should stay alert, but I doubt he'll risk coming after you again." Amelia nodded, her hand resting on Ruby's head. "We'll be ready if he does." That night, back at Clara's house, Amelia sat by the fire with Ruby and the pups at her feet. The encounter with Kevin had shaken her, but it also solidified her resolve. Ruby's fight for survival mirrored her own determination to protect the ones she loved. As she stroked Ruby's fur, Clara handed her a cup of tea. "You've been through so much," Clara said gently. "But look at where you are now. Ruby and the pups. They're happy, safe, and that's because of you." Amelia smiled faintly, her eyes drifting to Snow and Pebble, who were fast asleep. "We've come a long way," she said, "but it's not just me. Ruby fought just as hard. She's stronger than any of us realized." Ruby lifted her head, her gaze meeting Amelia's. In that moment, no words were needed. The bond between them had been forged through hardship, trust, and unyielding love. Together, they had faced the darkness and come out stronger. The first rays of morning light filtered through the windows as Amelia woke to the soft sounds of snow and pebble playfully tumbling across the floor. Ruby lay near the couch, her head resting on her paws, her amber eyes tracking every move her pups made. It was a scene of peace Amelia never thought possible after the events of the previous night. Amelia stretched and walked to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, her mind replaying the confrontation with Kevin. The fear she had felt was undeniable, but so was the resolve that followed. Ruby and her pups weren't just animals she had rescued, they were her family, and family was worth fighting for. Later that day, Amelia received an unexpected call from Officer Ramirez. "I thought you'd want to know," he began. "Kevin was arrested early this morning. He tried to confront another shelter worker, but this time we had enough evidence to hold him on multiple charges." Amelia's grip on the phone tightened. "So, he's gone?" "For now, yes," Ramirez assured her, "but we'll keep an eye on the situation." "You and Ruby don't need to worry." Relief washed over Amelia as she hung up. The looming shadow of Kevin's presence was finally lifted. She looked over at Ruby, who was playfully nudging Pebble towards Snow, her tail wagging softly. "We're safe now," she whispered. "Really safe." Later that day, Amelia received an unexpected call from Officer Ramirez. "I thought you'd want to know," he began. "Kevin was arrested early this morning. He tried to confront another shelter worker, but this time we had enough evidence to hold him on multiple charges." Amelia's grip on the phone tightened. "So, he's gone?" "For now, yes," Ramirez assured her, "but we'll keep an eye on the situation." "You and Ruby don't need to worry." Relief washed over Amelia as she hung up. The looming shadow of Kevin's presence was finally lifted. She looked over at Ruby, who was playfully nudging Pebble towards Snow, her tail wagging softly. "We're safe now," she whispered. "Really safe." The interview took place in Clara's cozy living room, with Ruby lying proudly beside Amelia as the journalist asked questions. Amelia recounted the moment she first saw Ruby on the busy road, the fear and determination in the dog's eyes, and the journey they had taken together since. When asked about her plans for Ruby and the pups, Amelia smiled. "They're not going anywhere," she said firmly. "They've found their home here with me." The article was published a week later, titled "A Mother's Courage: How One Dog's Bravery Inspired a Community." It quickly gained traction, and soon, Amelia was receiving messages from people moved by Ruby's story. One message, in particular, stood out. It was from a small animal rescue organization in a neighboring town, inviting Amelia to speak at their annual fundraiser. "We'd love for you to share Ruby's story," the organizer wrote. "It would mean so much to our supporters." Amelia was hesitant. Public speaking wasn't her strength, but Clara encouraged her. "You've already done the hard part, living through it. Sharing your experience can help so many more animals." On the night of the fundraiser, Amelia stood on the stage, Ruby by her side, and Snow and Pebble nestled in a basket at her feet. The audience was quiet as she began her story, recounting the moment she saw Ruby on the road and the bond they had formed. "Ruby taught me something I didn't expect," Amelia said, her voice steady, "that even in the darkest moments, there's a chance for hope. She fought for her pups, and in doing so she showed me the kind of strength I didn't know I had." The room erupted into applause as Amelia finished. Ruby stood beside her, wagging her tail as if she knew the moment was hers too. In the months that followed, Amelia's life took on a new rhythm. She continued her delivery job, but her evenings were now filled with visits to local shelters, helping to promote adoption and advocating for stray animals. Ruby became a symbol of resilience, her story inspiring countless people to give animals a second chance. Snow and Pebble grew into healthy, playful young dogs, their bond with Ruby and Amelia unbreakable. Together, they formed a family unlike any Amelia had ever imagined. One evening, as Amelia and Ruby watched Snow and Pebble chase each other across the yard, Clara arrived with an envelope in hand. "This came for you," she said, handing it to Amelia. Inside was a certificate of recognition from the city, honoring Amelia and Ruby for their contribution to animal welfare. Amelia's eyes filled with tears as she read the words. "I never thought we'd make such an impact," she said. Clara smiled. Ruby's story is proof of what's possible when love and determination come together. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the yard, Amelia sat on the porch with Ruby by her side. Snow and Pebble, exhausted from their play, curled up at her feet. In that quiet moment, Amelia reflected on how far they had come, from the chaos of the busy road to the peace of this new life. "You saved me as much as I saved you," Amelia whispered, stroking Ruby's fur. Ruby nuzzled closer, her eyes filled with trust and love. For the first time in a long time, Amelia felt whole. Together, they had faced the impossible and emerged stronger. Their story wasn't just one of survival. It was a testament to the transformative power of compassion and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. The cool evening breeze carried the faint scent of wildflowers as Amelia sat on the porch, her hands gently resting on Ruby's soft fur. Snow and pebble lay sprawled across the wooden planks, their tiny tails wagging in their sleep as if dreaming of boundless adventures. The tranquil scene was a far cry from the chaos of that fateful day on the busy road, a moment that had set everything in motion. Amelia glanced down at Ruby, whose eyes met hers with a quiet understanding. "We've come a long way, haven't we, girl?" she said softly. Ruby nuzzled her hand, her gaze full of gratitude and trust. It was a bond that words couldn't capture, a shared journey that had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The journey had been anything but easy, yet every challenge had brought them closer. Amelia thought back to the moments of uncertainty, the first hesitant steps of trust, the overwhelming responsibility of caring for 3 lives, and the lingering fear of what the future might hold. But those moments were outweighed by the victories. The warmth of Ruby's wagging tail, the playful antics of Snow and Pebble, and the sense of purpose that filled Amelia's days. Ruby's story had become more than just a personal journey. It was now a symbol of resilience, love, and the incredible strength of a mother's instinct to protect. Through Ruby, Amelia had found a new calling, advocating for animals who couldn't speak for themselves, helping to give them the chance they deserved. The impact of Ruby's journey continued to ripple outward. Families inspired by her story began adopting animals from shelters, motivated by the hope that every stray could find a loving home. Amelia often received letters and photos from people whose lives had been touched by Ruby's tale, their words filled with gratitude and hope. One particularly heartfelt letter came from a family who had adopted a senior dog after reading about Ruby. "We almost passed her by," they wrote, "but Ruby's story reminded us that every animal, no matter their age or past, deserves a chance. Thank you for inspiring us to open our hearts." Amelia folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box where she kept all the mementos of Ruby's journey. It was a reminder that their story had made a difference, not just for Ruby and her pups, but for countless others. As the stars began to twinkle above, Amelia stood and stretched. "Time for bed," she said, scooping up the sleepy pups and carrying them inside. Ruby followed close behind, her protective nature as strong as ever. Amelia laid the pups in their cozy bed, tucking them in with a soft blanket before turning to Ruby. "You've done so much, Ruby," she said, kneeling to meet the dog's gaze. "You've inspired me, and you've given me hope." Ruby leaned into Amelia's touch, her body relaxing completely. It was a moment of pure connection, a testament to the unspoken bond they shared. Before turning in for the night, Amelia sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She had an idea she couldn't ignore. With Ruby curled up beside her, she began typing a post for social media, sharing the latest chapter of their journey. She ended the post with a simple yet powerful message. "Ruby reminded me that love and compassion can change everything. If you've ever thought about adopting, fostering, or helping animals in need, now is the time. Let's make the world a little brighter, one rescue at a time." Amelia hit post and leaned back, her heart full. She didn't know how far the message would go, but she knew that Ruby's story had the power to inspire more than just their community. It could spark a movement. As Amelia prepared for bed, she reflected on how her life had changed since that morning on the road. What had started as a split-second decision to stop and help had grown into something so much bigger. Ruby and her pups hadn't just found a home, they had created one, filled with love, laughter, and a shared purpose. If Ruby's story has touched your heart, consider how you can make a difference. There are countless animals waiting for someone to give them a second chance, just like Ruby and her pups. You can start by visiting your local shelter, fostering, adopting, or even volunteering your time. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Like this video, Share it with your friends and help spread the word about the power of compassion. Together, we can create a world where every animal gets the chance they deserve. Thank you for being part of Ruby's journey and for being part of the change.